let's discuss the idea of ribbis with shutfus when a partnership with two people invested according to the Rif and according to the Rambam. A shutfus means one person even put in the money, but both people are working. And for the Ramah and Ashkenazim, we follow the opinion of the Ramah and the Rif that as long as both people are invested, that's called the shutfus. And the Smag writes, "Ein choshim mishum ribbis." There's no problem with ribbis. So taking that topic a little bit further, the Shach writes you're allowed to mechalek the ravachim and hafsedim kafi sheyirtzu. You're allowed to split up the profits and losses however you like. The Chavos Das, so to speak, takes issue with this and limits that significantly. The Chavos Das writes that once you make the Mikabel, the person who accepted the investment, the manager, take more hafsedim, then it's aser. And I'll read the words of the Chavos Das so we can think about it together. Kovayin Zayin Sefkatan Dalid. Ayin Shah Sefkatan Gimel Ad Cholkim Rebbe Behas Inyan Eza Inyan Shirtu. You can split it however you want, says the Shach. Nire Davka Inyan Shein Zer Litin Los Harticha. The only kula of a shutfus, kula, it's not just a magic wand. You wave shutfus and ribbis disappears. It's just a kula in paying schar tircha. You don't have to pay him for work. Why? Because he's working for him. He's working for himself. However, it is usher for the Mikabel to accept more losses than gains. He said because once you accept more losses, then that makes it usher. As it says in Kofayin Vav, that part is a milva, that part is a hava. So why am I then if I'm taking more losses and that part's a hava, why am I giving revachim on that part to the investor? That is karvus charak lehepsid. To describe the Chavos Das simply, Chavos Das is saying once you give a higher percentage of losses to the manager, it's his obligation to suffer losses in greater percentage than the possible gains revachim. That is aser because it turns out that he is accepting responsibility, which makes it like a loan. It's like a debt that he has to take care of. It's his responsibility. And he's not being paid for it. The other person's being paid for it. That is like ribbis. It's only d'Rabbanan because this is still fundamentally not to be used for himself. It's like an iska. It's like a pikadon midaraisa. So it's only a d'Rabbanan. But nonetheless, as we call karvus charak lehepsid, the figures are stacked against the against the manager and it's his obligation to have to pay. And that would be Asr said the Chavos Das. He raises one point that, wait a minute, shouldn't this be mutter? According to the Ramah and Siv Aleph, the Ramah writes that from the Trumas Hadashan, based on the Gilon and Tosos, on Bav Metzia Samochat, that if somebody accepts all achrayas, the nosein, the investor, accepts all the achrayas, all the responsibility possible for the loan, then it is his. Then it is no longer considered ribbis for the investor to get profits from the loan. That's the opinion of the Trumas Hadashan. Once the investor takes all the achrayas, it becomes a pikadon, an investment, as opposed to a loan altogether. Trumas Hadashan quotes that, as does the Ramah in Kofayin Zayin Sif Aleph. However, Chavos Das says that's not really relevant over here. Why isn't that a good kula for shutfus? I'll tell you why. It's because there's a benefit. That Trumas Hadashan only applies when it's purely that the manager is just managing the money as l'shliach and he makes no benefit, no money, often, not like an iska where he makes a side benefit, or no financial or even tangential, non-financial benefits. Over here, as opposed to that case, he is benefiting because there's a shutfus. Imagine noting Reva Mizah Hashan Asa Milva Machman Shukabla has said have a ribbis. Lo Damil had a Siv Aleph says the Chavos Das. It's not like the Ramah Hacha. He has a greater percentage. It's cheaper by the dozen. He has more money. So he has more money. He's able to do L'Sorach Esek Kamosh Kadav. He's able to do bigger businesses deals, and therefore that would be usher for the manager to take upon himself such a responsibility. The Darkei Tshuva quotes that the Chachmas Adam is lenient on a few things. First of all, he says it doesn't matter when we make a shutfus how everybody invests. You have to invest the same amounts. The Sheret Chaim had something about this, but the Chachmas Adam said there is no problem with that. Fine. And the Bris Yehuda also follows the opinion of Chacham Sadim. Then he mentions that the Chesed Avram really says, it says explicitly in the Bahag, in the Smag, rather, Smag, not Bahag, you're allowed to split it up however you like. Obviously, that's not like the Chavaz Das. That was his grandfather, so he wanted to defend his grandfather and said, it depends on whether you're paying out of pocket or you're paying from the Shutfus. If you're paying from the Shutfus, it is mutter, because then you don't have any Shubha Guf, as opposed to if you're paying from his pocket, that would be Asr. Okay? In my simple opinion, it seems that the Chavaz Das is disagreeing with the Chesed Avram. That really the Chavaz Das is saying it's Asr to accept Achrayas greater than the Ravachim. For the Mikabel to do such a thing would be Asr for accept such a loss, such a responsibility. And the Chavaz Das is giving an answer to his grandfather doesn't actually fit within the opinion of his grandfather. That's my understanding. It's my chalokas. And the Chavaz Das would understand the Smag is not against him. Why? He would say the Smag saying, you can make a Tanai, and the Shach means, you can make a Tanai for Racham and Hesed as you like, meaning they have to be equivalent with each other. It has to be 20-80 both on Ravachim and 20-80 on Hafsedim, or 50-50 on Ravachim and Hafsedim, whatever it is, 60-40, both for Ravachim and Hafsedim. However, what he means is, Kfi Sheyirtza means irrelevant of the money split. Even if they both put in equity 20-80, you can have the split be 50-50, and so on and so forth. That's all the Smag means. And yes, it's against the Rambam, but that's not a problem, because the Rambam Jalanti learned that the Rambam means it's only you're allowed to split where there's greater Ravachim than Hefsedim, or more Hefsedim on one side and less Ravachim on that side. You can split totally an unequal distribution when we're talking about Shnaim, two people, Nozim and Odnim, two people in the Shutfus are both working, because then this is their payment. Part of their payment scale is then two people are working differently, different skills, different strengths, so they're both paid differently accordingly, and therefore it makes sense that they are, if they're paid different, they're both working, they're paid differently, that's fine to distribute the Ravach and the Hefsed not fully equivalent to their they don't have to be justified 20-80 both by Ravachim and Hefsedim. So that's how I think we can explain the Chavaz Das. And the Darkei Tshuva quoted the Chesed Avram was lenient on this. The laws of Ribbis, chapter 22, footnote 2, quote the Chavaz Das. At face value seems to be machmer on this. The Darkei Tshuva Chaf Aleph also quotes the Parshat Mordechai, is also lenient on this. The Ate Levona accepts the Chavaz Das. The Imre Yosher Rameir Arik also accepts the Chavaz Das, and he is Tamea on the Chachmas Adam for this reason. The Bris Yehuda quotes the Chavaz Das as Yesh Omrim on top. Seems like he's really choshev for that opinion. The Torah Ribbis quotes this as a big machlokas, and he puts the Slach as agreeing with Chavaz Das. Fundamentally, I think usually it seems like the Slach is on the other side. The other thing that the Torah Rebbe is interesting in terms of Schar Kotzuv, we'll get to soon. We'll get to, and then we'll hopefully return back to the Torah Rebbe somewhere on that point. The Maram Jalanti is lenient when they're both Nosem and Notem Medavar, and then he allows giving more profit to the investor and less losses to the investor. That's perfectly fine. You can distribute however you like when it's a Shutfus when they're both working. That's the Maram Jalanti. Is not arguing with the Chavaz Das. It's talking about only one working. Chachmas Adam is arguing with the Chavaz Das. Chesed Avram, Nachalas Avos, who is the same person as Shardeya, as is the Eretz Tzvi, all three, who is the nephew, or great nephew of the Chesed Avram, and all three of them are lenient against the Chavaz Das, basically, or reinterpret the Chavaz Das, talking only when you're paying out of pocket on the Beisel. The Marsham goes through this, and he seems to be lenient, like the Chesed Avram. He has a case, Chelik Zayin, Simin, Memhei. Marsham is dealing with somebody who lent money to a company, and now he wants Revach. So he says, where Ruvain put in more money than Shimon, and he's taking off a percentage from Shimon's money based on how much more money he put in, 10% on the money he put in. Basically, he's taking a revach, a percent interest, based on the greater percentage to the money that they put into the shutfus however much more he put into the shufas than his partner, he was taking a profit on that. It says the Marsham, of course that Tanai is batel, is invalid because it's Tanai to pay ribbis. If it wasn't with a heteriska or with a non-Jew. So then he said, however, let's say it really made Ravachim, the greater percentage that Reuven put in to the shutvis than Shimon did, he's allowed to take the Ravachim that it actually accrued to. That's what the Tashbeit sounds like, unlike the Radbaz. But he says, certainly it should be allowed according, each person could take certainly according to their money, because even though usually in a shutvis everybody takes la'emsa, schar la'emsa, but over here when it's understood, clearly they're makbid, they want to get according to their money, if putting in more money gives me more money in return, we are allowed to follow that as low as a Tanai. Marsham does note from a Tanchuma a very nice idea that in Parshin the Tzavim says Yakiru love Chavirim, the Pasuk in Eov, the Tanchuma in the Tzavim says that when people are doing business, so there's some people doing business. Someone invested 10, some invested 50. They buy a jewel and then they sell it. This jewel and get a profit. You know where you should divide it? You should divide it according to their investment. The guy put in 50 should make more than the guy who put in 10. Just like that's in business. Between the investors, we divide. Hashem says, anybody who's learning Torah, but mitzvahs and involved in mitzvahs, he's going to get paid back for the schar that he worked according to the effort he put in. Who is it that I'm not going to pay back and who is working in front of me? You knew who's working in front of me is going to get paid? You, Jewish people. In this world, you're standing mitzvahs to do my mitzvahs. You know what I'm going to pay you? Your dividends and returns will be. The Marsham has another case, where he says that he was set up that there's 12% promised to the investor, and the rest of the profit was going to be split. And they accepted that even when there's no revach, when there's losses, they're going to accept it as a chov and then repay when there is revach. So the Marsham comes out that if you say that when I'll have revach, I'll pay you 12%, that's great. That's permissible. Even though it's a machlokes Tashbeit and Radbaz, he thinks there is reason to be lenient, like the Maram Jolanti, when it's a shutfis, you can say you're going to give 6% schar kotov, you're allowed to give schar kotov if it's from revach. But if I say I'm going to give 12%, even if I don't make any money this year, that is, and there'll be a chov if I don't, that he thinks, says the Marsham, Chelik Zayin, Simon Kufmam, is also according to everybody. He does have a solution based on the Mayim Rabbim that the Beis Ephraim quote, which is to pay him for some other schar involved in transportation. If you could sort of make it reasonable that I'm paying this schar for, even when there's losses, for some other benefit he's giving me, then that's acceptable. But that doesn't always work in our cases, but that is another solution the Marsham brings in his particular case. Let's go through the Slach, who often is quoted as disagreeing with the Chavas Das. In Drush Ches, he says, Kvaris Kardi is a ribbis. I've discussed ribbis. Hine od dvar echad askir. I'll describe one other thing. Mashe nechshalim is a ribbis gamer. Pshut she'osim al-shem oni. Sometimes a rich person and a poor person get together and make an agreement. Ze pruto v'ze raglo. This guy investing his money and this guy with his foot. This guy working b'dasko b'gufo. Hine afilu shem shavim b'revach u'hafsid. Even if they are equal in 50-50 in loss and gains, yesh iser, it's usher. It made another schar mola because that's an iska. And Chazal said you have to pay the worker who's working for your iska. We also made sure there should be no losses. Basically, the manager is taking achrayas, kol achrayas hefsed al midasi, and then they split profits. But all the revach is upon the midasik. So that's for sure. It's a gomer. That's ribbis. Because it turns into halva. Once the manager is responsible to pay out of pocket, that's a loan. That's also. Amnam, he says, that's when it was like an iska. As long as there's some profit that's given over to the possible profit given over to the investor, the manager, even if it's not exactly equal. Something, even if it's 99 to 1, whatever, it's not equal. but there's some profit possible to give into the manager. Even though it's not equal in losses also. Sounds like he's not holding like the chavas das. It doesn't have to be lined up, the hefzer and the revachim. If it would be 100% achrayas on the misah's sake, of course that becomes a halva and zaser. In kan shuftas legamri, it's not even shuftas. Then he's explaining the rif. He says a different explanation than what most people say. The Slach Note of Yehuda says that near tama of any mukol shel rif mishum in kan halva. It's not a halva. Bishum is someone doesn't give. That's an iska, and then why is he working? He's working for me for free. But over here, one guy gave a little bit. Since the regular rule is and two people invest, we split it evenly. So if that's true, so that's perfectly fine, even if the one person takes a lot of achrayas. So it comes out the other person, it's like he has very little in the pot. Okay, but it's very little, but so what? He has something, so he should automatically, both of them should get 50-50 rewards. Imay no tell yoter michati rebach adayin in kan milva. Shofilim tis lomer shalveo al vi erach chelak harva shenotim mikomok kivin shenesh gam notin is asach. But shoftas, even if part of it's a loan, but some part of it's not a loan, some of it's not a achrayas on the manager. So then they both have stake. They both have still stake in this. They both have shoftas still. Av more b'mor. Then we can still split it 50-50 in profit. Now, according to the Slach, if you really follow his argument, once you take all of it, then it becomes us because it becomes a halva. If you really follow the Slach's argument, it seems like this concept is not so malleable. You can't apply it to every single case, and it starts saying that you could split up according to all the time that you want. Rather, the pshat and the rif really is you're allowed to get 50-50. Even though it's not particularly in achrayas, it's not even. To get further than that would actually probably be usr. That's the opinion of the Slach and understanding it. Now it comes up with some general understanding of why you're allowed to do schar lamsa. So because that's the normal way of shutfim, to give a schar lamsa, even though one person has a lot more than the other. Now, in theory, you could tinker with the Slach and say maybe he would even mean if you make it t'nai that should be more than 50-50 of revachim. Perhaps it's also mutter. Maybe that's perhaps arguable that he would allow such a thing, but it's not at all clear. It seems like it's coming from a, so to speak, a natural setup of Chazal. The structure of a shutfus is 50-50. That we could say is permitted when even any person just has a small 1 to 99 percentage in this pot. So then they're both part of the shutfus and schar la'emsa, and that's reasonable. Even one person is taking a lot more achrayas, but not all achrayas. This is going to be relevant, but not the same. Quite similar to the Zera of Ram Yitzchaki that the Divrei Gaonim quotes, which is that you can't do preferred return of all 200, but as long as $1 out of 200 is going to the manager, that's allowed. Which is important, similar to this slach. The Chachmas Adam seems to be not like the slach, and not like the Chavas Das at all, because in you can make preferred return 1 for 100, 1%. You're not allowed to give 1% preferred return usually. If you say that I'm going to give you whether there's revenue or not, I'm going to give you 1%, that's risk because it's someone it's a loan. Even if you say you're going to take that, and then the rest, beyond 1%, you're going to split, that still is avik ribbis. Because it's not that the investor should get more money, the opposite, the manager should get more money. According to Chazal. But what's a good solution to give 1% fixed returns? Make it a shutfis. They both put in money, then you can do this. You see, he allows char kotzev. He allows giving them 1%. Sounds like first not like the Chavas Das, because giving him 1%, even though the Revachim and Hafsedim are the Revachim, one person has advantage, the 1%, and the other person, when it comes to Hafsedim, are still 50-50. Seems like he's very much not like the Chavas Das. And it seems like, in theory, the 1% is, even when there is losses, then it would be, that is, and he writes it in the Shtar Heteriska in his Kufmam Gimel Siman. He also writes this as well. But it could be he only means to permit. Certainly told Rav Ike Sultan. It could be he only meant only when you're making money to give him 1%. That perhaps would be matir by the shutfus. If he matired even further, it's a gigantic proof, very big source. Chag ben Yamin says this is a proof that the Chachmas Adam does not agree with the Chavas Das. He's more Mekel. I'm not sure that's 100% Mochrach, because it could be he's talking about that you give him the first 1% Revach, and that there's a lot of Achrayas on the Hafsedim, or all the Achrayas for the Hafsedim, and then, okay, or if there's Hafsedim, he needs to take 1% of the Hafsedim. Basically, it could be, really, he's talking about a case where you'd set it up that the first 1% of the Reva goes to the investor, but also maybe the first 1% of the Hafsedim also will go to him. Okay, but I do think, generally speaking, this seems to be a proof against Chavas Das, like the Chacham Ben Yamin said. Chacham Ben Yamin sets up the Machlokas, that if you want to set it up, if you want to make it not fair distribution of Revachim and Hafsedim, the Chavas Das is Machmir, but many are Mekel. If it's not paid Mi Beito, it's just paid from the Shutfus. The Mincha Yitzchak Kotchas Rami Paskins like him when he's talking about a bank and treating it like a Shutfus. And the one person lends to the bank, they're going to lend back to you. So for that Durabana, we can be lenient to assume for a Shutfus there's no ribbis. Okay. There are other opinions on this matter. The Maram Jalanti's Tshuva. Maram Jalanti Simon Sarichet, the Magin of Yerushalayim, 1500s, he says, Reuven gave it $100, Shimon $1,100, Levi $1,200 into a business deal. And for any extra amount over 800, Reuven gave it 100, he gave the least, all of them gave it 800 or more. And for any extra amount, they're going to get paid 20%. And Reuven takes achrayas for everything. And they're going to split 1/3 of the revach after that. So it sounds like beyond 20% it's even, but the first 20% go to making sure that the first revach make sure that 20% is paid back on the extra $300 Shimon added in, or $400 that Levi added in. And the Maram Jalanti amazingly responds that Moses Shutfis, everybody put in, you don't have to worry about this at all. Even they put in double the amount, there's a lot of achrayas. And he quotes the Ram in Perek Daled, in Perek Vav, in Hilchos, Shutfim Shluchin, and that it's permissible to set up a Shutfis where it's not particularly even. That's perfectly fair. Everybody's working. Even you're giving them 20% on their money extra they put in, no problem. Because this is a shutfus, you can split it up however you like. Maram signed Moshe Jalanti. The reason this is an incredible source, but not a proof against Chavas Das, is because he's talking within the Rambam's opinion. Once they're talking within the Rambam's opinion that both people are working, when both people are working, they're being paid according to the way they work. And since someone's working harder, better, he's smarter, he can work differently than someone else, you can pay him more. And you could take, the other party could take more achrayas just to cover that payment. So the fact that there's a non-equal distribution is permissible when both are working is not a proof for when only one of them is working. So even though there's a different definition of shuttas for the Rambam and for the Rif, but once we're working within the Rambam's definition, we can matter a lot more when both of them are working. Even though it would be seemingly promised return, and even though it would be a lot of achrayas, it doesn't matter, it'd still be permissible. But if we were talking about one of them working, that would already be a problem to do this type of thing. Even if we accept the Rif LHoraah, it's still one person working, you couldn't possibly do such a schar cuts of 20% before anything else. Nachlas Avos, the author of the Shardea, says a case where Reuven and Shimon both put in $500 and then Reuven added another $1,000. So he wants 12% and then to split the rest. Shimon is the working man and Reuven is the bigger investor. And Shimon gets paid a weekly fee. So he says, There's a minhag that you give preferred return to the investor a greater amount. You want to explain it, that once there's he wants to explain this. He says The first explanation is really this is just a shutfus. Misim the ram of the shach who said you could one guy gave more than the other, no problem. Asheni midatek levad mutter. Revel yoder mipalgav shein lo behefsid. Alpagam shom de ein cham alvalav rak shem shutfus bam. There is no loan. This is just a shutfus, and one person's allowed to take more than 50%, even though he's only taking 50% of the hafsedim. No problem. Time came to carve the schar the hafsid in al apik ribbis. It's all derabanan, and they weren't worried on this derabanan. We're talking about a shutfus. The Marshach says they each put in the same amount, and then Reuven added something else. And he says, for that extra amount, I want to make sure to get that money back. Plus, I want to get a certain percentage on that money, fixed rate on that money that I added extra beyond our shutfus. Says the Marshach, no chance, no doing. Every dollar, that's ribbis ketutza. This is their rice, no tchis. Amazing, it's terrible. I don't even need to prove it. It's for sure. How can any Jewish person ribbis before took the anime? He do such a horrible, terrible thing. He gives it to them. How can you do such an awful thing? You don't do that. It's like a raw. You're not so ribbis ketutza. Gavin and don't do that. Adif tvei lesser midiraisa have is ketutza. In this case, for sure is deraisa. He carved the milk have is ketutza. He goes back and back and he continues and continues. For sure, this yotuk de'anim. It is ribbis. No question. The Bris Yehuda learned the Marshach is talking about when it was Katsuv that he's going to give money, even though it was only out of the Revach. When there is Revach, he's going to pay. When there's not, he's not. Chagam Ben Yamin argues, no. This is talking when there is definitely Ischar Katsuv. It seems more convincing like the Chagam Ben Yamin because he's talking about Ribbis Ketutza, and that only makes sense if it was Katsuv. Also, he made a comparison to Rabbeinu Tam Son Barzel. And Son Barzel, Rabbeinu Tam, was Ribbis Ketutza because that was Revach Ben Yeh Ben Loya. Whether or not there was revenue, he was going to have to pay. So that's why I think the Chagam Ben Yamin's reading is stronger. Mishpat Shalom, the Marsham quotes the Radvaz, and Tashbeit, if someone puts an extra money into the Shutfus, are you allowed to take extra Revach upon that? Tashbeit, yes, Radvaz, no. But it's not particularly compelling that this is particularly relevant to our cases of giving an extra amount for a greater investor than for an investor compared to the manager, because the Radvaz and Tashbeit were talking about someone who, after the show was already arranged, wants to give money without the permission of everybody else. So do you say that he's like making a loan to the company? That's not part of the shutfus at all. So it's not part of the shutfus. It doesn't follow the rules of the shutfus. So of course there's ribbis on that. That's how the Radvaz seems to be understanding. And the Tashbeit might be assuming, yes, you can give a pikadon and they'll take revach because of that, but not ribbis. It's not really particularly relevant to our questions about shutfus to begin with. A shutfus, any money has to be acknowledged that all shutfim agree to as being part of the capital of the shutfus. So you can't just add money into a shutfus willy-nilly. Marshdam, Simon Samach Aleph, quoted widely on this topic, says that Reuven put in more money than Shimon, and then he wants to take that extra capital back and also 8% on it, and then split the revachim. So he writes, this is also wrong. He quotes that maybe taking achrayas, the Trumas Zadeshin, would work. He says that's not going to really help for his deraisa. Fine. There's more than the practice is usually to give for a shutfus. Obviously, it's only because of a loan. Obviously, it's no different than any other case where someone says, "Oh, come and live in my. Since you lend me money, come and I'll live here for free. So I'm giving you a benefit." That's ribbis. Same thing with the tourist says when you do a sale and you're giving me a discount for a prepayment. When it's a tremendous discount, it's nikar lakol shusham tanamos umaleu having a varish. Then even if you didn't say anything given to tier pricing, it's still usher because it's such an obvious difference between us the regular price and the discount price for early. That makes it obvious that there's time value of money being paid. Ribbis. Okay, even except achrayas, it doesn't help. You can't pay him extra. That's Marsham. It's quoted widely again. Machlokas Prince Yehuda says this is talking about even though it's just revachim from the schar, it's also usher. I don't think it's, and the Chacham Ben Yamin doesn't think this is mochrach. It could very well be he's talking about, I give him not just from the schar, I give him whether there is ravach or no ravach. I'm going to give you a schar kasa, but if it wouldn't be that, it could be Marshdam would allow it. The Divrei Gaonim quotes a Zera Avram who allows giving with two people invest and one person invested more. You can't give the investor preferred return of all $200 first, 200 others come in. You can give him 199 and 1%, whatever, some percent goes to the manager. But it can't be all or nothing. And once you do that, then it's not a car of the schar because it's not something particularly kutzav upon the manager to have to give. As long as he could possibly make, that's allowed. So he also says it fits with the Marshdam. In that respect, it sounds like though that he understood the Marshdam to mean that if you didn't take a krayas for the hefsid, then it would be for the extra amount. That would be usher. Basically, you can learn that the Marshdam seems to be the Marshdam is machmir on these cases. It would only be if you don't get preferred return completely to the investor. Okay, so it could be the Marshdam is machmir, even though he's only giving from revenue, like the Bris Yehuda learns. Whether this is foolproof or not, it's a tremendous raya lesor to be machmir on shilas when you're giving schar cuts of in preferred return. And that's all given to the investor before the manager. Okay, so the Shevet HaLevi breaks it down basically to us, and he says Shutfus doesn't cure all issues with the ribbis. And you can't give ravach when it's kotzav. When it's not kotzav, you can be lenient, like the Marsham and other poskim who are willing to be lenient on that question. That's in Chelik Hey Simon Sadi Zion in Shevet HaLevi. Minchat Shlomo was entertaining the idea that a investment in the bank would be a shutfis. And then he comes up saying, since of clawback, we don't take clawbacks from those people, it's really not a shutfis. It just shows that an absurdum, it's not reasonable to say that every time someone puts money together, obviously it's a shutfis. The Rabbi Mendel Shafrin in Yashav Atoch Yud writes about this topic. He says by shutfis, prefer returns. It seems like the Chavaz Das would say it's usher, and that's why he says it's a problem. Then he mentions the slach, and then he says that it would be mutter, though, if both of them are working. Sounds like he's uncomfortably lenient like the Chesed Rav and the Slach, but he's willing to be lenient when both of them are working. Rabbi Yisachar Schreiber also thinks it's a problem to have the preferred return, but he says the Chachmas Adam allows such a thing. So, to summarize, some of the issues in the Waterfall distribution preferred returns with ribbis are this unfair distribution. That would be seemingly against the Chavaz Das in terms of shutfis, but there are mikilim on that, like the Chesed Avram, Eretz Tzvi, Parsha Drachim, Nachal Asavos. That's one topic. And another topic is preferred return, where the Kinyan Daya of Rabbi Schreiber thinks that's the son-in-law of Rabbi Sturmas thinks that it theoretically could have been a problem, but Lamaisa is Mekel because the Chacham Adam is Mekel. Maram Jalanti, we should add, was also Mekel. So preferred return could potentially be mutter. If there's schar katav, we're giving a return. If there is katsuv, whether there's ravach or not, that is asr l'kuliyama, as Marsham, Marshdam, Marshach, and Marsham, all right. Chalkom and Yamin, all right. And Rabbi Rees agreed with that, that's asr. But if you're giving ravach only when there is revenue, that could be mutter. That could be mutter. Chalkom and Yamin writes, even though the Bris Yehuda is machmir, but yes, it's true, there could be machmirim, but there is some reason there is something to rely on for the mekilim, like the Chacham Yamin raises. Okay? That's the background over here to understanding preferred returns and waterfall distributions. Every case is a little bit different, but in the waterfall distribution, when there is revach being given to the investor from the revenue, even if it's preferred return, but it's not guaranteed, because if there never is distribution, there never is available cash to pay, because the company didn't grow, there wasn't capital events that brought in new capital, it would only pay off the original, enough to pay off the original capital, not revenue, then the preferred return would never be paid. And when it's liquidated, it would never need to be paid. Since that's the case, so fundamentally, the preferred return is paid from revach, is paid from the revenue, and not from capital, not paid from people's pockets, certainly, and stop people from people's pockets. Therefore, I think there is reason to perhaps permit it. Speaking for RIETS, I think that is what he would have said when it would be cumulative or accrued, but not compounded. Once it's compounded, or once it's accrued and is taken from people's pockets, or it's accrued and it's paid off like it's debt, even when it's liquidated, then absolutely be usher. But otherwise, there will be some reason to be lenient. On halacha l'maisa shayla, you should ask your rabbi. Yashar Koach.